The church bells of St. Augustine's tolled with such force that they seemed to rattle through the entire town of Brighton Hollow. The grand oak doors opened wide, and there she was, Emily Harper, radiant in white lace, her veil trailing like a cloud of innocence. Guests whispered about how beautiful she looked, how fortunate Daniel Wright was to marry her. The Wrights were one of the town's most respected families, wealthy, influential, and untouchable. For Daniel, the marriage was supposed to be the culmination of everything he had ever worked toward. A stable life, a loving wife, and the image of perfection he had always strived to project. Yet beneath Emily's glowing smile and sparkling eyes lay something far darker. A secret carefully buried beneath years of silence, bribes, and desperate attempts to outrun a past that refused to die. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. Candlelit chandeliers bathed the reception hall in golden hues, violins played soft ballads, and champagne flowed endlessly. The newlyweds laughed, danced, and clinked glasses with their guests. To the outside world, everything was perfect. But to Emily, every laugh felt rehearsed, every glance over her shoulder haunted. She knew that beneath the glamour of her gown and the comfort of her vows, she was living on borrowed time. Friends noticed it first. The way her smile faltered when strangers approached, the way she gripped Daniel's arm a little tighter whenever someone mentioned her past. She had moved to Brighton Hollow only 2 years earlier, and though she presented herself as a woman starting fresh, whispers had followed her. Some said she'd fled from a violent relationship. Others claimed she had ties to a shadowy man in another city. A few swore they saw her once, years ago, in a courtroom far away, giving testimony that sealed another person's fate. The details were fuzzy, but the weight of mystery never left her. Among the crowd was Margaret Olson, an elderly neighbor of Emily's. Margaret leaned toward a fellow guest and whispered, "She's lovely, isn't she? But mark my words, people don't run to small towns unless they're running from something." Those words, though soft, seemed prophetic. The night of the wedding should have been blissful. Instead, it became the prologue to horror. In the suite Daniel had prepared at a secluded countryside inn, rose petals lined the bed and champagne chilled in a bucket. Emily stood by the window, her hands trembling as she looked out at the empty road disappearing into darkness. Daniel, watching her reflection in the glass, noticed the tension in her shoulders. "You're not happy," he said quietly. She forced a smile. "I'm just overwhelmed. It's a lot to take in." But Daniel knew better. He had heard whispers, too. Before proposing, he'd hired a private investigator, a man discreet enough to dig where Daniel's own reputation couldn't afford to be tarnished. The report had arrived a week before the wedding. A report that Daniel had locked away in his desk drawer, unopened, until the night before the ceremony. And when he finally read it, his blood had run cold. Emily Harper wasn't who she said she was. Her real name was Amelia Dawson, and her past was soaked in blood. Amelia, or Emily as she now insisted, had grown up in a troubled home 2 states away. Her father had been abusive, her mother absent, and her teenage years a whirlwind of survival. By her early 20s, she had become entangled with a man named Victor Hale, a notorious figure in underground circles. Victor was ruthless, violent, and heavily involved in smuggling. But more damning was the event that would shape Amelia's life forever. The night Victor's associate was murdered in cold blood, Amelia had been there. Some say she pulled the trigger in self-defense. Others believed she orchestrated it. Either way, she was the star witness in the case that dismantled Victor's empire. But protection came at a price. Rumors claimed she testified in exchange for money, that she accepted bribes to conceal her full involvement, that some men had gone to prison while others, guilty as sin, walked free because of her silence. The name Emily Harper was born out of necessity, a new identity to escape the wrath of Victor's surviving allies and anyone else who knew the truth. Daniel, discovering all this on the eve of his wedding, had been torn apart. But in his mind, There was no room for betrayal, not from the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. His pride, his obsession with perfection, couldn't endure the idea that his bride was a liar who had walked into his life with hands stained red. As the clock in their suite ticked past midnight, Daniel's questions came sharp and relentless. "Who are you really, Emily? Or should I call you Amelia?" Her face drained of color. "You don't understand." "I understand enough." Daniel cut in, his voice icy. "You lied to me, to my family, to everyone." Emily tried to explain. She begged, pleaded, even fell to her knees. "I wanted to start over. I wanted to be someone new. I didn't want you to see me as the broken girl I used to be." But Daniel's mind had already fractured. Rage coiled inside him, not just at her lies, but at himself, for falling in love with someone so tainted. For hours, the suite became a battlefield of words, accusations, and tears. Emily swore she had tried to bury her past. Daniel demanded every sordid detail. The champagne remained unopened, the rose petals untouched. And then, sometime near dawn, something inside Daniel snapped. The innkeeper later testified that she heard muffled shouting, then silence. When she knocked on their door around sunrise to offer breakfast, no one answered. Inside, Emily lay lifeless, her body sprawled across the once romantic bed. Daniel sat in the corner, his hands stained with the evidence of his rage, his eyes empty. He didn't flee. He didn't weep. He simply stared at the lifeless form of the woman he had vowed to cherish hours earlier. The discovery of the crime sent shockwaves through Brighton Hollow. Guests from the wedding were roused from their beds by police officers delivering the unthinkable news. Emily's bridesmaids wept uncontrollably. Daniel's mother collapsed in disbelief. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones outside their picket-fenced homes, struggling to reconcile the fairy tale wedding they had just attended with the nightmare that followed. Margaret Olson, the elderly neighbor who had voiced suspicion, told reporters, "I knew something wasn't right. You can't just run away from your past. It always finds you." As police investigated, Emily's secrets began to surface like corpses floating to the top of dark water. Her connections to Victor Hale, the testimony, the bribes, the fake identity. The town, once enchanted by her beauty and charm, turned cold. Some pitted her as a victim of circumstance. Others condemned her as a manipulator who had deceived everyone, including the man she married. But perhaps most chilling was Daniel's demeanor. He didn't resist arrest. When officers handcuffed him, he simply muttered, "She lied. She lied about everything." The trial became one of the most sensational spectacles the county had ever seen. Courtrooms overflowed with spectators. Journalists filled every bench, pens scratching furiously. The prosecution painted Daniel as a cold-blooded murderer who snapped when confronted with the truth. The defense argued he was a man deceived, manipulated into a marriage built on lies, driven to insanity by the weight of betrayal. Witnesses took the stand. Friends testified to Emily's kindness but admitted she was guarded about her past. Old acquaintances from her former life emerged, painting a picture of a woman who had reinvented herself more than once, often leaving destruction in her wake. Rumors of bribes resurfaced, hinting that Emily's testimony against Victor Hale had been less about justice and more about survival and profit. The courtroom drama was punctuated by Daniel's chilling lack of remorse. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply sat there, staring straight ahead, as if the trial were happening to someone else. When asked if he regretted killing his wife, his only response was, "I regret ever meeting her." Family members clashed outside the courthouse. Emily's surviving relatives defended her, claiming she had been a victim all her life. The Wrights, humiliated and enraged, insisted Daniel had been provoked beyond reason. The town itself was divided, half condemning Daniel as a murderer, half sympathizing with him as a man who married a stranger wearing a mask. In the end, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were stern. "You had every opportunity to walk away. Instead, you chose violence. Deception does not justify murder." But even as the gavel fell, whispers lingered. Some wondered if Daniel had uncovered even darker truths than the court ever revealed. Others questioned whether Emily's death silenced secrets that could have toppled more powerful men connected to Victor Hale's empire. Conspiracy theories flourished, suggesting Daniel had been manipulated, that Emily had been hunted, or that the marriage itself had been doomed from the start. Years later, the countryside in where it happened sits abandoned, the once romantic suite forever tainted. Locals say strange noises echo through the halls at night. Some claim to see a bride in white standing at the window, staring down the road as though still waiting for a future that never came. The story of Daniel and Emily, of love, lies, and blood spilled in the shadow of a hidden past, remains a cautionary tale whispered in Brighton Hollow, a reminder that no matter how beautiful the veil, the truth always waits beneath it. And for those who remember the tragedy, the question lingers still. Was Emily Harper a victim of her past? Or was Daniel Wright a victim of hers? Never forget, hidden secrets have consequences, and perfection is only a facade. It can be deceptive. For more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment so you don't miss out on our next story.